One morning in January 2024, a shipping lane just disappeared, not from a storm, not from a political embargo. The brass lines on every AIS tracking map that used to thread north through the Bab-el-Mandeb, gone. 67% of container transits in a single month, rerouted by a militia running drones purchased on the open market and missiles supplied by a country that can barely keep its own lights on. How does that actually work? How does a non-state actor, in a country that has been in civil war for nearly a decade, functionally close the most important shipping corridor on Earth and keep it closed? There's a specific figure buried in Kpler's vessel tracking data from February 2024 that makes the answer stranger than it sounds. We'll reach that number about 10 minutes from now. When you see it, the question of why the world's combined naval response changed almost nothing becomes a great deal harder to dismiss. To understand the scale of what changed, you need to understand what the Red Sea corridor normally does. The Suez Canal route connects Asia's manufacturing coast to Europe's consumer markets. A container ship leaving Shanghai bound for Rotterdam has two real choices: go northwest through the Malacca Strait, across the Indian Ocean, up through Bab-el-Mandeb and the Red Sea, through the canal and into the Mediterranean, roughly 19,000 kilometers, or go southwest around the southern tip of Africa, past the Cape of Good Hope and up the Atlantic, roughly 24,000 kilometers. 10 to 14 extra days of steaming each way every voyage. That gap, 5,000 kilometers of ocean, is the entire margin the canal exists to eliminate. The Suez route exists specifically to make that first option viable. Since the canal opened in 1869, it has been the artery connecting the two largest trading blocs on Earth. By 2023, Lloyd's List intelligence data put approximately 12 to 15% of all global trade by value moving through it each year. For container shipping specifically, the share was higher. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimated roughly 30% of total global container flows transit Suez. One canal, 30% of every box on Earth. Hold that number. The Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, the entrance to that corridor from the south, is 29 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Ships transiting in one direction use a shipping lane roughly 3 kilometers across. There is no meaningful detour. You either go through it or you don't go through the Red Sea at all. Anyone who understood that geography understood exactly what it was worth as leverage. The Houthis, the Salalah movement that controls much of northwestern Yemen, including the capital Sana'a and the port city of Hodeidah, understood this geography perfectly. They had been fighting a grinding civil war since 2014. They had been bombed by a Saudi-led coalition for years, and they had spent that time watching the world's most valuable shipping lane run 29 kilometers from territory they controlled. The first Houthi attack on a commercial vessel in this campaign came on October 19, 2023, when a helicopter assault team seized the Galaxy Leader, a Japanese-owned, Bahamas-flagged car carrier with links to an Israeli company. 25 crew members were taken aboard. The seizure was largely treated as an isolated incident, a political statement, a one-off. What came next was not isolated, and in about 3 minutes, we'll look at the exact cost ratio that made the international naval response structurally impossible from the first week. Through November 2023, the attack tempo accelerated. The Houthis deployed anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and one-way attack drones, sometimes called loitering munitions, targeting vessels in the southern Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. By mid-December, they had attempted attacks on more than a dozen ships. Most missed, some didn't. On December 3rd, the CSAV Tyndall sustained drone damage. On December 18th, the Strinda chemical tanker was struck. The shipping industry was watching every AIS track in the southern Red Sea and running the math. What changed the calculus for the shipping industry wasn't the hit rate. Most attacks missed. What changed it was the spread of targets. The Houthis first announced they were targeting vessels with links to Israel, then any vessel headed to or from Israeli ports. Then effectively, the entire southern Red Sea became a zone of potential engagement. At that point, the question for a shipowner wasn't whether the Houthis could reliably hit their vessel. The question was whether they wanted to find out. Nobody did. The weapons themselves deserve attention. The Houthis used a mix of systems supplied primarily by Iran, supplemented by domestically developed variants. Anti-ship ballistic missiles, a category that until recently was considered largely a Chinese naval specialty, give a land-based force the ability to threaten ships at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. Layered with cruise missiles and drone swarms, the attack packages were designed to saturate defenses. One-on-one, U.S. Navy destroyers like the USS Carney and USS Gravely demonstrated they could intercept these weapons. The problem was volume, cost, and what it cost to stop them, which gets to something important. Operation Prosperity Guardian was announced on December 18, 2023, by U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The coalition ultimately included naval vessels from the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, Canada, and Bahrain, among others. The intent was straightforward: establish a naval escort corridor, deter attacks, and give shipping companies the confidence to resume Red Sea transit. It was the most significant multinational maritime security operation in the region in years. It had a structural problem baked in from day one. It did not work. Not because the navies performed poorly. USS Carney alone fired over 100 interceptor missiles in the first months of the operation, but because of a structural problem that any shipping risk officer could see immediately. A Standard Missile-2, the workhorse interceptor for surface ships, costs approximately $2 million per round. The Houthi drones being intercepted cost an estimated $20,000 each. The ratio is 100 to 1. Sustaining that exchange rate indefinitely is simply not viable. But the number that actually moved the industry wasn't the missile cost. It was a single freight rate figure that appeared roughly 4 minutes from now, and it's larger than most analysts published at the time. Beyond the cost asymmetry, there was an escalation geography problem. Defensive naval operations in the Red Sea could intercept missiles and drones en route to ships. They could not eliminate the launchers. Striking those launchers meant strikes inside Yemen, which the US and UK did conduct beginning in January 2024, targeting radar installations, missile storage sites, and launch vehicles. The strikes degraded some capability. They did not stop the attacks, and the shipping industry, watching all of this unfold in real time, was drawing its own conclusions. The Houthis had, not for the first time in their history, demonstrated a useful insurgent quality: the capacity to absorb punishment and keep operating. The next few acts cover where the system-level effects got genuinely strange, the part most coverage missed entirely. The critical signal for the shipping industry came in early January 2024. Maersk, the world's second-largest container line by capacity, had initially announced a resumption of Red Sea transits under naval escort. On January 5th, the Maersk Hangzhou was attacked. Maersk suspended transits indefinitely. When the second-largest container line on Earth decided that a multinational naval escort corridor was insufficient protection, the rerouting stopped being temporary. It became structural, and it became so within days. The AIS, Automatic Identification System. Data tells this story with unusual clarity because ships broadcast their position continuously. What Kpler and marine traffic analysts recorded in real time was not a gradual drift. It was a near-total structural shift in global container routing across roughly 6 weeks. On a live map, it looked like a river changing course overnight. By late January 2024, Kpler's data showed that transits of the Bab-el-Mandeb by large container vessels had fallen by roughly 60% compared to the same period in 2023. Some specific trades saw sharper drops. The major European liner services from Asia, the strings operated by Maersk, MSC, CMA, CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, and the Ocean Alliance carriers, had almost uniformly switched to Cape routing by early February. These 5 carriers collectively represent something close to 80% of global container capacity. 60% fewer ships through the strait, 80% of the market already gone. The Cape of Good Hope route added between 10 and 14 days each way, depending on vessel speed and origin port. For a large container ship burning roughly 250 tons of fuel oil per day at normal service speed, each additional day of steaming costs between $15,000 and $25,000 in bunker fuel alone, at early 2024 prices from Ship and Bunker's Rotterdam Index. Round trip, the diversion added $250,000 to $400,000 in fuel costs per voyage, before a single dollar of port costs, crew time, or charter rate implications. And that was just the direct line on the spreadsheet. The indirect effects were larger. The freight rate response was almost immediate and large. The Freightos Baltic Index for Asia-Europe container rates roughly tripled between early December 2023 and mid-January 2024, from around $1,500 per 40-foot equivalent unit to over $4,000. Spot rates on some lanes hit even higher. The market was repricing 14 days of additional transit time, plus compounding congestion effects in real time. But the rate spike was actually the legible part of this. The stranger effect was hiding in the fleet deployment math. And near the end of this video, there's one vessel count figure in the Q1 2024 canal transit logs that makes that math visible in a way the rate charts never did. Here is where the system-level effects become genuinely counterintuitive. Adding 14 days to an Asia-Europe voyage didn't just mean ships arrived late. It meant the entire fleet deployment calculation changed simultaneously for every carrier that made the switch. The same number of ships serving the same routes now needed to cover 28 extra days of ocean per rotation. Something had to give. Container shipping operates on fixed schedule weekly strings. Each string requires a certain number of ships to maintain port calls on the published schedule. If your transit time increases by 14 days round trip, 28 days per rotation, you need additional vessels in the string to maintain frequency. In early 2024, there was no large pool of idle container ships readily available. The order book had vessels coming, but not delivered. Carriers scrambled to substitute tonnage from other trades. Ports at both ends started feeling it almost immediately. The consequence showed up in port congestion at both ends. In Singapore and Port Klang, ships bunched as Asia to Europe services reconfigured their rotation patterns. In Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Felixstowe, the arrival pattern became irregular. Long gaps followed by simultaneous arrivals as the new Cape schedules clumped into ports. European terminal operators who had reduced gate hours after the 2022 congestion peak suddenly found themselves facing queue-driven dwell times they hadn't planned for. The disruption had migrated thousands of kilometers from the Red Sea and was now showing up in the Rhine Delta. There were secondary effects on transshipment hubs. Port Said, at the northern entrance to the Suez Canal, saw a collapse in feeder traffic because mainline services were no longer calling Mediterranean ports on the same rotation. Jeddah Islamic Port reported significant throughput declines. The port of Salalah in Oman, which had been a transshipment growth story, found itself suddenly off the main routing entirely. Ports that had spent years building market position around the Suez corridor discovered that the corridor itself was a single point of failure, and they had no hedge for it. And here's where it gets stranger. While European importers were paying sharply higher freight rates, the ship owners and carriers who rerouted were, in some cases, posting significant profit improvements. The additional 14 days at sea soaked up excess capacity. Overcapacity had been the industry's core problem through 2022 and 2023. Rates had collapsed. Carriers had hemorrhaged value. Analysts were predicting a prolonged downturn. The Red Sea crisis didn't worsen the industry's fundamentals. It accidentally fixed them. Here's the number I mentioned at the start of this video. The one that reframes why the naval deterrent failed to restore confidence. Not as a military failure, but as something more basic than that. By February 2024, Kpler's analysts documented that approximately 380,000 containers per week, containers that would normally have moved through the Suez Canal corridor, were instead moving on Cape-routed voyages. 380,000 containers per week. The naval corridor that Operation Prosperity Guardian established was patrolling a lane that had already lost the majority of the traffic it was designed to protect. Shipping companies hadn't paused to wait for the Navy to solve the problem. They had solved it themselves by going around. The escort was guarding a largely empty road. That's the actual answer to the central question here. A lightly resourced sub-state actor didn't close the Red Sea through military superiority. They closed it by creating enough uncertainty that the cost-benefit calculation for transit flipped for every major carrier simultaneously. The threshold wasn't destruction, it was doubt. And doubt in a global logistics system running on thin margins and fixed schedules is more than sufficient. It's everything. What the Houthi campaign revealed is a structural vulnerability that hasn't been resolved. The Suez Canal corridor is irreplaceable in the sense that no amount of Cape routing fully compensates for the time and cost loss. But the corridor's security depends on the political stability of a coastline that has been in effective civil war since 2014. The IMO and Lloyd's Market Association both maintain Yemen on the Joint War Committee's listed areas, meaning war risk insurance premiums for Red Sea transit remain elevated. As of mid-2024, attacks had not stopped. Major carriers had not returned. The canal was open. The corridor was not. The world's most important maritime choke point is still technically open. Any ship willing to transit can transit. But the world's largest carriers had already answered the real question. Not whether the canal was open, but whether the corridor was safe enough. In early 2024, for the first time in the canal's modern history, the answer was no. And in a system built on the assumption that it would always be yes, that single-word answer changed everything. The next episode looks at the one clause buried in standard marine war risk insurance policies that no carrier's communications team wanted to say out loud, and why it's now the most quietly consequential line in global shipping. If this got you, the next episode on this channel is about the economics of the Cape of Good Hope route itself. Why the port of Tanger Med suddenly became one of the most strategically important transshipment hubs on Earth.